Welcome to this week's Tech Drop-In session. This is the Asia Pacific version, flavor, whatever you want to call it, midday Australian Eastern Standard Time on Friday, the 21st of February. I'm Jason Bordujenko. Welcome, great to have you along. And if you're watching after the fact, it's not the 21st or it's later in the day, certainly keen to see your comments on the YouTube links that are posted. So this week, going a little bit of a different topic, something that a lot of our viewers have actually requested a little bit more information on and hope to do it good justice in a 30-minute time slot, and that is monitoring and observability. So what are the ways that we can get some of the service status and metrics from Megaport? And I'll cover three of those different ways that you can do that in today's session. So firstly, I'll feel that I've probably done a few of these intros now. Hi, my name's Jason Bordujenko, or JB, much easier with that abbreviation. So I'm head up the solutions architecture side of Megaport for Asia Pacific. I'm based in Brisbane. Been with the company just over 9 years now, and certainly had a hand in a lot of what you're about to see today, and actually have some interesting preview items to share with you as well. So it'd be great to get some feedback as people are interested. And I think this topic is one that comes up on a semi-regular basis, so it's worthwhile doing a bit of a deeper dive. Where you can contact me if you do wish to follow up, and I have had a couple of follow-ups this week from previous videos. So thanks to you, you know who you are, that have been able to push that content through and actually get some customer questions asked. JB@megaport.com, that's probably the easiest one, or you can go and hunt me down by my surname there in LinkedIn and chat to me there. Either way is fine. All right. So this is the whole agenda. I'm not going to be doing the death by PowerPoint keynote or Google Slides today. I much prefer to walk through things, but I think it's handy to have an overview of the framing of the conversation and what we want to take people through in today's tech drop-in. So it will cover very briefly. I think most people that are joining us now have a great understanding of Megaport service offerings, and they fall roughly into two distinct categories, which is the access products, being the Megaport itself, the 110 or 100 gigabit per second physical port that's installed in over 930 data centers globally. From there, we have MCRs, which is the Megaport Cloud Router, and MVE, which is the virtual edge. So a hosted or fully managed cloud routing environment, so a BGP speaking router. And then we move into MVE, which is a network function virtualization or NFV platform. And then, of course, you'll hear terminology like VXC, which stands for Virtual Cross Connect. And that's where we can stand up that connectivity between any two of those access products, so between port to port, port to MCR, MCR to port, or even MCR to MVE, for example. And then off the back of that are things that may not sit in necessarily your own account, but you may be connecting from a port into a cloud service provider on-ramp, for example. And you can imagine when you start moving workloads to cloud providers, that they're providing a lot of metrics, a lot of scalability, a lot of elasticity in those fabrics. It's important to ensure that you've got that same scalability and flexibility in terms of monitoring those connectivity options, be it a direct connect, express route, Google Partner Interconnect, an Oracle Fast Connect, or the very myriad ways that our customers utilize those VXCs across all of the access products. So the majority of customers are going to be using our portal, so portal.megaport.com, and they're able to gain access directly to those statistics in real time. It will show graphs, it will show logs, and I want to actually dive into how to find those and what they look like. So we'll be talking about accessing the services page, how that is distinct from now the service status page. This is a reasonably recent introduction, so we'll cover that as well. And then we'll move into, I guess, the piece that has been there since day dot, the API. So our application programming interface is a question that a lot of customers have asked, but perhaps not actually implemented service monitoring with the API. A lot have understood what the API does and what it returns, but we're going to go a little bit of a deeper dive today into actually how to start that journey if you wish to build to our API. But then that opens the door to the last topic for today, which is a bit of a beta preview on OpenMetrics. So if you haven't heard of OpenMetrics, you may have heard of, if you're in the cloud realm, terms like Prometheus, Grafana, Influx database and Victoria Metrics. If you've heard of one or more of those, you're probably familiar with Datadog or Splunk, for example. So all of those tools and tool chains are ways that we can integrate into the enterprise and how that actually does support the monitoring and observability piece. So just as a rough outline, I'll start on the first piece, which is we're starting to see, obviously, the term perhaps AI is getting thrown around a lot, but I feel that it's the full term is really AI/ML. So the machine learning components of AI are really where we've seen the improvements over network observability and how is that distinct from network monitoring. So what we're seeing with these AI or ML powered monitoring tools is that they're very good at looking at trends. They're able to detect anomalies. They're even in some cases able to predict failures or failure events based on trends that have happened in the past, and able to do some cool stuff in terms of self-healing network challenges that might pop up. Now, we already do that in the core of the Megaport network. You hear things like the 100% SLA, a VXC takes multiple paths. So that's actually a component that we're doing that monitoring, doing the proactive scaling on our capacity as well. But the automation component, I think, also needs to be applied on the customer layer, or it needs an understanding of what's going on under the hood. And of course, we try and expose as much information as quickly as possible to make those decisions in seconds rather than taking hours. So that sort of intelligence we see, that's really a critical component. Any enterprise network that is, worth its grain of salt is absolutely supporting and encouraging that sort of visibility, but also the tooling and giving it that capability to respond in a software-defined manner. So building infrastructure components that might be across multiple cloud environments, might be just a data center interconnect, so a port-to-port link. But I think the value of the Megaport platform is it can interconnect all of these pieces. So a conversation topic today, such as drilling into those service statistics, even if it's just today, looking at the portal and seeing what's available, I think that's really where we need to be spending some time. So let's dive into that. Let's have a look at service status in the portal, talking about the services page, so service logs, and go into some details. So I've actually got two portals open here. I have our staging portal. You notice it says it's a non-production environment. I'm going to use our production environment today because it more accurately represents where that information is available. So I did point out before that there's a differentiation between our services page and what's been added over here with the service status page. So the service status page would actually show maintenance and outage events. I don't currently have any that I can show. You'll see that all of these fields here are currently 0, which is great. There's been no planned maintenance or emergency outages within the last 7 days to talk of. Obviously, I would be getting an email for planned maintenance events, generally 2 weeks out, or any outages. If that was in real time impacting my services, they would be coming through an email, but it is useful to know that the service status page exists, that it is in the portal, and it is possible to interrogate that and actually look up any of those events that might impact you. So in terms of services, however, they actually sit into what are those access products. So we spoke about the port, the MCR, and the MVE. I actually have some services that are built in our solution architect environment. So we can actually scroll down, and these are live services, so they're actually collecting traffic. And where we start to see the service metrics is when we click either on the component itself. So I can click on this port here that says SA Lab in B2, or I can click on the cogwheel icon that actually says port details. We can step through there, see service on a map, service keys, lock, etc. We're just going to go into port details, and that will show the details, but it will also allow me to tab through to see things such as logging events. And this is where we'll start the conversation on what is viewable. So I'll notice here that we actually do have some events that have been, not in the last 7 days necessarily, just outside of it. February 13, there was a up-down trigger, so between 12:11 a.m. and 12:15 a.m. So that particular interface has gone down and come back up, but there's been a reboot of the box. It could have been on our side, could have been on the other side, but we've lost the light connection on that. So you can see back in time, that service log will actually track back all the way to the genesis of that particular interface, and it will show where that's located. If I step through once more to the usage tab, however, we start to get I guess, more metrics related to the service, and these are graphs and counters. So this is worthwhile just having a quick pause to see what is actually available there. So we saw in the previous item there with logs, it was an up down, it was a binary event. The service is up, the service is down. With usage, we're going to start to get those counters, and we can set things such as time. So my reporting, I'm interested in the last hour, or I'm interested in the last month, or actually start building it out. I can do last 3 months in there as well, or set a particular date and timestamp as a to and from. So that's the first interesting bit. There's two directions of that traffic. You'll notice red and blue. So by default, I've got both of those recording. This is actually set on the traffic at the moment, and that's the traffic that's been seen at our port. What's coming into the port is in blue, and what's going out of the port, so the transmit and receive, is shown there as well. I haven't made any speed changes, but we would see that if we did the configured speed in megabits per second. So that would be on a VXC, that would make a difference. I did touch on there that under metrics, we have a few other interesting areas as well. So rather than just the utilization, which is quite low for this demonstration port, we can look at the packets, packets per second in this case. So where those spikes are in volumes, you also expect them in packets per second. But there's also some other interesting things such as the optical power. Now, this is a port, so we can actually see the optical light levels, and again in transmit and receive. So we can see in here the blue is at -5.4 transmit power in dBm, and then RX power is -4, and we can see that that dip in the graph. So that would correspond with that up and down event that we're speaking about. We can also look at errors. So are there any errors incrementing on that actual interface? And I guess the key point is here, each of the service of the access product services that we have will have different metrics. For example, an MCR and MBE will not actually show optical levels. That's relevant only to a port. So each of those will have a greater set or a subset of those options, but you can see that it's possible to swap through there. The only other component worth pointing out there is to set the time zone. It is generally set in Greenwich Mean Time, or UTC. So that's 10 hours different from where I sit, or I can put it into a local time zone. It is possible to then also do a CSV export of those figures. So I can download those figures based on that reporting interval that I've chosen. So it is quite a flexible set of tools that are available. That information of service up or down, and then combined with the service metrics, it is worth pointing out that the graphs are updated every 5 minutes. So there's a 5-minute reporting or polling interval on our side, and that will then be presented as 5-minute incremental data each time. So we might say that's a good start, and I've mentioned that we have the CSV file available that I can go there interactively, log into the portal and download that configuration. A few of our customers have taken it to the next level, and they said, well, we actually want to be able to encapsulate that information, to capture it on a regular basis, to integrate with your API, so we don't actually need a human with a login. In this case, we can actually set up a read-only user that can extract these statistics. They won't have rights to the rest of the portal, or adding or editing those services, adding new services or changing existing services. And to do that, we use our API. Now, this is something that we publish very good documentation on, and we have moved from using username and password, which you use to log in to the portal, to API keys. So this will be a quick overview on how to find that information, where you would go about collecting the API key, and then moving to the next stage, which is actually getting the token. Your browser will do all of this for you. And in fact, if you know anything about browser tools, if you use Chrome developer mode, all of what I'm about to show you interactively is actually, it's exposed underneath the hood of the portal. So any of those commands that I was using, those pages, in order to step through and see those service statistics, I will be able to represent that data in the underlying layer as it was presented to the browser for graphing. So that can be very powerful to ingest into your own monitoring system. It is possible, as I said, to do this without actually needing any Megaport support, but obviously a lot of our solution architect teams are quite versed in doing this and are able to help in some cases. So let's have a look at that, the Megaport API in and of itself. So this page here is free to access. There's no login required, and it documents all of the API commands. It is dev short for developer, dev.megaport.com, and it will show all of the particular login calls, the authentication calls, and then the telemetry calls, in this case, to get the service status. I will step through this briefly, but I won't be reading the documentation. The first step that we want to do is actually generate this token, so that JWT token that we were talking about before, and that's using the username and password, or not in its it's not in its direct form, but using the API key and the secret that we've created. So let's go and do that first. We do need an API key. And then a token is what will be presented by my application. And the token is actually valid for up to 24 hours. So you do need to refresh this command each 24 hours. It's a validity that that token will be available for any of those calls within that time. So the first step, and I did have the staging portal open before, is creating that API public and private key. So if we head over to the tools menu, you'll actually see there's an API key generator. And there's quite a few keys that are here in our staging environment. I'll be creating a new one for the demo. So demo JB in this case. Now, there's two levels of access. There's full access, company admin, and if you've got an interactive Megaport account, you'll know where the company admin access is. It's at the top level of the hierarchy. But there's also a read-only role. So that would be useful in this case to have the validity of a user who is effectively logging in and retrieving those metrics. It doesn't need to make any changes. So rule of least privilege exists. And by the way, a little bit of a pitch here for the Megaport blog. There's been a recent article that I've published there that's talking about Azure and moving to secure by default. So least privilege is certainly one of those areas that we encourage for those environments that actually don't need any higher level of privilege. And the default token expiry here is set at 1440 or 1,440 minutes, which is 24 hours in the one day. And that's the maximum that we can set. Now, that doesn't mean that the key is valid for that amount of time. That means what comes after it is valid for that amount of time. So once I've created that, there's no state secrets here. This is a read-only user in our staging environment. This will go away. It will be overwritten within a certain amount of time, but it's good for a demonstration purpose. So API key is presented there. That is the public information. It is always available. It's the one that was showing on the page when we landed in there before, but you'll also see the API key secret, or really the private key. Just notice that it's not possible to regenerate that or see that secret. You can't then go and retrieve it. So this is the only time it will be presented. And what do we do with that information? Well, I won't close that screen straight away, but I'll go into our documentation and I'll notice here that if I wish to actually extract the token, I can do this in an environment that's actually integrated with our documentation. That integration is called Postman. So it's either an application that you run locally on your machine. I'm running a Mac, so that's an option, or I can actually do it in a web browser. So that's what I've got set up here at the moment. I have an environment that's set up. It's pointing at staging. I'll actually be using production because we want to retrieve some active data. But that is where I would drop the information that was provided in that previous page. So API, client ID, and then client secret are required. So they are variables that are set at this state, and they will be used in the follow-up calls. And the follow-up call in this case is to generate a token. And I'm not using the staging environment here. I'm actually going to use production environment, and I'll push that command straight out to the system, and we'll come back with a short-lived or 24-hour access token in this case. So what I want to do is actually set that as a variable in and of itself. Let's actually take that and set it in as the access token, as we will use that in the next step. And the next step is to look at what products we have. So when I did that in the portal, it actually showed me those services, and then I was able to filter on a specific service. The call that I would use for that is get product list, and I have that open already. So get product list will show the current set of all products that are set under that company, and it's available to this read-only user. So I'm going to just set a couple different variables. I'll turn them off for the start. And if I just send that request to the API endpoint, it's going out and looking for all of the current products that are underneath that user and collecting it from that API response. So it's doing that in real time, and we can see that's quite a lot of returns in that case. Now, interestingly, the first one that's come back is the one that I was showing before, so that data that we had, but it's found 720. So that's everything in the life cycle, including things that have been decommissioned. we would then filter that further perhaps and actually look for just those that are sitting in the status of live. So if I do that same call again, but I've toggled on provisioning status is live, we can see that's narrowed down to 67 products. So that's good. That's what we have in the staging, in the lab environment. Now, the key components are, I'm interested here in the port known as V2 SA Lab, and in particular, the product UID. So I'll take, this is a globally unique number. I'll take just that first set of 8 characters, and that will actually be what I'll use to identify it in the subsequent call. Heading back to the documentation, we want to get the statistics for that port. So what's available from the engine that actually provides that? This is under service status. The first one is probably to see what sort of metrics are available in general. So I mentioned before in that drop-down list, things like the throughput. There was the A side, the B side of the megabits per second that were used, the packets per second, again, A side and B side errors and optical light levels. So these are all available to return from the API, but they are documented there. So I can probably step to the next point, which is to get the telemetry relating to a port. So in this case, it's going to ask us to input that product UID and then provide a to and a from indicator to actually say, what are the the dates that are wrapped around this. So again, if we come back to that list there and we say service status and log data or metric types, and we say get port telemetry, notice it'll be different commands for VXC, MCR, MVE, IX, or the internet service. So if we step through this now, we're saying the request is to look at the product Megaport and then the product UID. So that is what I grabbed previously. And the telemetry, I can indicate what sort of type of information I want. So going back to that documentation there, and this was metric types, what am I interested in? Well, this is the port. I'm probably interested in looking at the bits per second rate. In this case, I might be interested specifically in the A side of that, or you just say use the bits flag in general. So let's bring that in here under type, and I'll type bits. And in terms of from or to, I can either specify that explicitly or say in the last X many days. So let's just use the last 1 day. And if I send that through there, it will use that token that I provided previously, and it will return, much like what we get in that comma separated list file, the bandwidth in, the bandwidth out. And I've noticed here that these are in 5-minute increments, as I mentioned. So you'll start to see those reflected. Now, as I said, I could have done that in the portal and pulled the CSV file, but this is actually a integration that I want to write to my particular monitoring system. I won't necessarily go any deeper than that today. This is just to show the documentation that's available, utilizing Postman. How do I log in to make that request to actually then get a token and provide that token and actually see what metrics and metric types are available. So we can see that the other part that's worth mentioning is API rate limits. Obviously, if you're sitting there in front of the web browser itself, it can be a bit slower when you're actually stepping through those. It's probably not going to hit a rate limit, but we do have some rate limits and also some good troubleshooting. So this is not on the dev site, it's over on our documentation site, docs.megaport.com, and there's a section here on troubleshooting the API. So any errors that you may get, things like identifying the production or the staging environments, things like getting 400 errors or bad requests, what might have actually been the blocker, what might be different in that syntax. But the other component, as I scroll down, that is worthwhile looking at is the the API limits, so the rate limiting itself. I mentioned that those service metrics are scraped every 5 minutes in terms of the monitoring data. Those up-down events, if they're on a specific device, if that's triggering it, it might be more frequent. So there will be a method that I can show to increase the polling, but you're only going to get the 5-minute utilization data. So our API rate limit is 500 requests in a rolling 5-minute period per IP address. Now that can be across multiple services as well. In terms of updates, we've just got a read-only user, so this is not pushing any changes. So that reduced limit of 100 updates per month per service is not applicable in this case. It does notice there that these are not specifically enforced or hard limits, but we do review that on a regular basis to see if there's any, overly excessive polling or something on the API that might cause load issues or cause any other challenges. So just bear in mind the rate limit and the troubleshooting steps that are available. Okay. So that's good that we've covered off the API and doing that through Postman, which is a great tool. But that involves you writing on your side a collector that actually grabs that information in the way that we formatted it for our API. And obviously, we've done that for what you've seen in the portal. But this is a beta that I want to speak about that's available. And talk to your solution architect if you're interested in this, if you have existing services, or if you're interested in pursuing it. I'll go through a very quick demo of it today. And this is utilizing OpenMetrics. And now this is an interesting standards-based approach of interchange to that monitoring information. So OpenMetrics itself, it's not a declarative language as such. It just shows how I would represent usually information that's managed from cloud providers, but it could be network specific, in which case we are today. And what does it aim to achieve? It speaks to platforms and speaks in languages that are more cloud centric or cloud first. So Prometheus is the tool that I'll be using today that will be interacting with our API and then collecting a time series set of information and passing that to a time series database. So we've chosen InfluxDB for that, and then presenting that. How do I make that available on a dashboard? So this is utilizing Grafana. Now, as mentioned, this is beta, so things might change over time, but it is somewhere at a stage we're happy to get customers into it. I'm going to go off into the command line because that's an interesting place to get some information. And you can see I've actually got, well, it should be two files. I've actually got three files. One has my secret that I'm not revealing to the world today. But let's have a look at Prometheus drop in the YAML file. So this particular file says we're going to be polling Megaport every 1 minute. Now I can adjust that as required, and it will be looking at api.megaport.com, which is the same endpoint that we used previously, and the OpenMetrics beta endpoint in this case. So all we're doing there is using our token. This is the client ID and client secret. It's actually going out and retrieving the token on our behalf. So there's not too much to see there. The other one that's worthwhile is I've actually built a Docker Compose file, and this builds the Prometheus image, the Influx database image, and the Grafana image all in one. I've actually had that running in the background, so I won't take that environment down, but we'll step into that to actually have a look. So the first thing that I want to look at is Prometheus itself. So let's come over here and we'll actually jump into Prometheus, which is currently going out and getting that information for us. I can see that if I say target health, that it's pointed to the OpenMetrics endpoint, and it's doing, the last scrape was about a minute ago, so 50 seconds. It's taking about 300 milliseconds. So that's great, that's running. I can move now into the query field, and if I type Megaport, you can see those metrics that are actually being returned. So input errors, output errors, optical receive power, DBM, receive bytes, receive packets, transmit bytes, transmit packets, and service speed, megabits per second, and service up down. Let's have a look at service up down. That's probably an interesting one. This is just a binary yes or no. The service is up, in which case we'll return a 1, or the service is down, in which case we'd return a 0. So what's being returned here very simplistically is for this port that is at this data center, and it's a numeric location for the type of Megaport, and you can see here there are different types of products, MCRs, MVEs, etc., that the service is currently down. And we do expect that as this is a test and development environment. That's great. That actually shows the queries are returning, but what most customers want to do is build something cool with that. So Prometheus is going and grabbing that information, it's passing it into Influx. We're going to now move to Grafana, which is actually installed as part of that Docker file, that Compose bundle. And Grafana is running on the same host, but it's actually interrogating that database. So we can click there on dashboard. And this is a dashboard that's been built to actually represent some of the monitoring that's available. So in this case, I've broken out the virtual services. I'm going to spell services right. We can see MCRs, and we should be able to see MBEs in that as well. And they're actually returning the full unique identifier. In this case, we're seeing the transmit rates there, and we can see some are higher than others. For ports themselves, we can see receive power. So receive power here, these ones are receiving light. These ones that are down low, probably down around -40, they're live, but they're not receiving any power. So they're not currently plugged into anything, which is what we'd expect for something that's in the lab environment. Transmit power, we can see, is set variably across the different ports that are there. That's going to be transmitting at a reasonable level between 0 dB and probably -10 dB. We'll see those metrics set based on that particular optic that's in that chassis. So this is just a template that's been built out, but we also have a very basic granular up-down indicator. So in this case, we're going out and using that polling. It's actually querying the Prometheus data through the database and saying service up, and then against this particular service ID. And we can choose any of those service IDs just in terms of a drop down there, run a query on it, and it will actually return whether that is currently up or down. I wonder if I'm going to luck onto one that's currently down. So that's one that we showed before, which is one of those ones that are actually down, 641. So I can come in here and start typing 641 and run that query, and we can see that that service is down, which is what we've seen in that information that's returned. So there's a lot there that is able to be covered off. The future stages of that is, obviously we've shown there in very brief, utilizing Prometheus, Influx, and Grafana. There are other stacks that might be able to do that. Another common one we've seen customers come to us is using VictoriaMetrics. It's bundling both the database and the collector into one. And then in terms of the presentation side, tools like Datadog or Splunk are being used. So that's about it for today. That's where we wanted to cover off. I'll pause and see if there's any questions. I haven't had any come through the Zoom chat. There might have been on the LinkedIn. So it allows us to wrap up on time today. But if you do have follow-up questions, if you've been watching the YouTube stream, certainly feel free to throw that into YouTube. Or LinkedIn questions as well, or I'm happy to take that on email down the track, as I mentioned, jb@megaport.com. So again, thanks for coming today. Really appreciate it, and hopefully see you at the next one.